Hey guys, so I just wanted to give a disclaimer before I follow through this video. First thing that you need to know is that this story contains depictions of, well, non-bloody, but still tragic suicide, depression, and heartbreak. There is mild sexual tension, but not much of it, really, but still is there, so. Now, if you're still here with me for the story, I need to very explicitly point out that this is not my story. I didn't change anything about it. I didn't alter it. Absolutely no % of it belongs to me. It was written by It's Real for Us on WattPad. I strongly suggest you go to her page and vote the chapters of her story, as it is not fair. She gets nothing out of it. I'll be leaving her WattPad link in the description below as well. She has put a lot of effort into adding imagery and playing with the layout and fonts in just the perfect way that made the story very enjoyable to actually read and experience it the way she intended for it to be experienced, or I don't know. I myself personally just read the title and the first few lines and knew that the story would be amazing. So I've recorded this on the go with no knowledge of the ending, and low-key, homeboy had to hold back some tears here, had to re-record a couple of bits at the end. My voice was cracking. Touched me deeply. I greatly enjoyed the story. Thank you, It's Real for Us, for this beautiful contribution to the Drarry community. Utmost respect to you, and I hope I will do your story justice with the way I will be reading it out for my audience today. If you ever do find out about this video, let me know. I'd be curious to find out. And now, without further ado, let's get started with part 1. I sighed, licking my ashen fingertips as I switched to the next page of my muggle book. The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I've been reading the novella for months now. It had supposedly been one of his mom's favorites growing up, and since I couldn't even bear the thought of reading anything magical anymore, this was the closest I'd get to any kind of solace. No, reading Hogwarts books will only rip open old wounds that are just starting to mend. I can't do that. I reminded himself as my eyes scanned the bookshelf across my room where my old textbooks lay to rest. Reading, I had found with time, was the best outlet for his pain, an opportunity to escape from everything I was feeling. I didn't mind if it was just for a short while. To be fair, even something as transient as being lost in a book was worth it. Seconds, minutes, hours, any peace is still peace. It would be a couple of minutes less of basking in self-hatred for things I couldn't will into fixing no matter how hard I tried. I read until the sun became moonlight, and then I shifted my eyes to the old oakwood desk beside me. It had been a gift from Hermione's mother. She, more than I would have ever expected, was greatly saddened to see the world her daughter was uniquely part of gone with a flash. She knew just how much it tore the witch that was her once-to-be little girl apart that broke her. The clock read 11:58 p.m. It had almost been an exact decade since Voldemort had taken my other world away from me. I could still not fathom it for what it was. It was too heartbreaking to truly grasp in its entirety. It was like looking the devil in the eye and accepting defeat. I can't even begin to explain the guilt that came with the horrific events that took place on May 2nd, 1998. I am the great Harry Potter, the boy who lived. Which also means I was the wizard who everybody was counting on, whether they used those words or not. I was supposed to save our universe, save us all. It was my destiny to kill Tom Riddle once and for all, to make sure he could not cause any more harm than he already had. I needed to avenge my parents' death, my mom's bravery, and the night she passed. I was not able to, and that alone might have been what ate at me the most. It was because of me that so many people lost their homes, their loved ones. I simply was not strong enough, despite my wanting to be. In the end, we all had 3 choices, all 3 having their own particular consequences. Some people stayed and tried to pick up the broken pieces of our civilization. Others turned to the dark forces, and the remaining tried to make a life for themselves in the Muggle world. After everything, I could not help but think, no matter how horrible it was, that I understood those who turned. Most of them were purebloods. They did not know the other world that lingered out there beyond their magical upbringings. They were also smart enough to know trying to build back up a churned world would come with the highest potential ramifications of all. death. I wanted to believe that there was some better option. But the truth was, I had stopped believing in magic long ago. I was not necessarily frightened for the Muggle-borns or half-bloods. I knew that they would find their place much faster than they first would have assumed they would. I was fearful for the purebloods, the ones who had not joined Voldemort. I especially considered the two remaining Malfoys, Narcissa and Draco. I knew it would most probably be hardest for them. They had decided to come to the Muggle world because they refused to follow in Lucius' footsteps. They wanted a clean slate, a new life, one where they could dictate who they were and what they wanted. Over the years, things began to get better. It was the very beginnings that were the most excruciating. With time, the guilt had died down. It never left me, but it became bearable, which was the easier to swallow. Ginny, after only 2 months of living amongst Muggles, left me. Part of me wanted to believe it was because I was always depressed and too hard to live with. However, another part of me knew that it was because I was not the hero she had always made me out to be. I was a failure, in one way or another. I think that, deep down, Ginny had always wanted me to be her knight in shining armor. She had expected me to be one thing, and when she saw me as the other, she ran. To be fair, I could not fully blame her. I wanted to be the savior she had expected from me, that everyone had. I had even thought at one time I could fulfill it. The clock struck midnight. I let a warm tear stream down my face as flashbacks of Hogwarts filled my mind to the rim. I wanted to yell, I wanted to cry, I wanted to forget. It was of no use. The castle of all my drunken dreams would forever be engraved in the depths of my mind to never be forgotten. The faces of old classmates and professors would always echo like a never-ending picture book story I wanted to be blind to. I got up from my bed, tears brimming my emerald eyes. Silky crimson bed pillow and sheets, one still reminding me of my old Gryffindor dormitory, were sprung across my mattress. I could not handle anything more. My breaths caught in my throat, begging to let me sob, that dance there wildly be released. I would not let it. I knew if I bawled now, I may never stop. The pain would sway me in its doleful arms and clench me tight. I ran outside, away from the memories that would never cease, but I could not get rid of my mind. I peered at the dark sky reeling above me, biting down my lower lip, a bad habit I had picked up in times of suffering. A storm was on the horizon. Outside, I felt the trickling rain fall on my shoulders. I had, for as long as the war's end, despised the rain. Like many things, the rain came and went as it wished. It could not be told when to downpour and when not to. It just was, and because of that, it just felt as if it was simply another thing that could not be controlled. Another situation. No matter how hard I tried, I would lose over and over again. I hated the way my brain made everything a competition now. I just wanted to relax, to be freed from the thoughts that drove me mad. For once, I looked up at the night sky and let the raindrops cover every inch of my visage. The world seemed so quiet, except for the sound of water eloquently hitting the ground that was my surroundings. I could hear nothing but the pitter-patter of my own yellow rain boots and puddles expanding in size. It was short, but peaceful. My eyes shifted to the green forest that was in front of me. It was hard to decipher the trees' branches so late at night, but nevertheless, I was still able to. I knew there was a park on the other side of those trees. I did not know how I was aware of such. From my memory, I had never even been, never managed to make myself across the dense greenery. Somehow, it reminded me of the Forbidden Forest back home. It may be funny, especially after all these years, but I still associated Hogwarts as being my home. It did not matter what had happened, what still was, my heart stayed there. I could not change that. I did not want to change that. When I really allowed myself the ability to think back on better times, Hogwarts really was my only home. The Dursleys had just been resting place until secondary came. The wizarding world had been the only place that I ever felt any sense of real stability, of happiness. I'd experienced and suffered so much at the same time, but I had also never loved so earnestly, so profoundly. That world had taught me friendship and bravery. It had taught me that love never dies. Even in death, the ones that love us never truly leave us. My aunt and uncle never made me feel anywhere near that. They barely ever made me feel decent. In that house on Privet Drive, I was nothing but a misfit they were too unkind to take care of, and too kind to fully disregard. I felt unwanted, just another mouth to feed. I know that is why, even though I am a half-blood, I never really associated Muggles to anything but a temporary living space between Hogwarts years. It did not help my wonder. Without really wanting to, I would sometimes find myself questioning what happened to them. I had checked on them once or twice to make sure they were still alive and well. Nonetheless, more than anybody else in that family, my cousin Dudley still came to mind quite often. I hoped for him he had found the happiness he deserved. He had never been truly a bad person. I watched as the wind slightly rippled through the pine trees that were in front of my similar-colored eyes. I still did not have the courage to step forward. I was no Gryffindor no more. Their smell conquered my senses, and the earth had that dewy, earthy smell from the rain. I decided at that moment that enough was finally enough. I put one foot in front of the other and watched my feet slowly make an imprint in the dirt, becoming mud below me. I closed my eyes and jolted forward into the green abyss that reminded me of home, and for one single moment, no matter how small that moment may have been, I was there. I was in the Forbidden Forest. I was home. I looked to my left and saw Ronald Weasley, Ron, like I like to call him, standing beside me. I felt my heart clenched tightly. I could not help it. Tears began to roll down my cheeks. I knew that I wanted nothing more but to be again part of that world. The world where magic was not an act played in theaters, but it was who we were. Over the years, Ron and I had gained much distance. There was no particular reason. We still loved each other the same, but after the war that we had lost, everybody drifted away from each other. Being surrounded by other wizards and witches was too difficult. It reminded us of everything we had lost, everything that had literally gone down in flames. I tried to let those thoughts leave my mind and appreciate this one perfect moment, even if I did not feel like I deserved it. I found myself walking deeper and deeper into the unknown, unafraid of memories fluttered before my eyes. Suddenly, I remembered being chased by spiders and seeing the Weasley car disappear into the Forbidden Forest in one of my years. I smiled to myself ever so slightly, hearing my best mate's shrieks vibrate through me when he had seen Acromantulas. Even I had considered screaming in fear. Oh, the fun we had, I said out loud, followed by one of those soft but sad giggles I could no longer repress. Even if I knew I was the only one there, my heart was unsettled by my own comment. I languidly pushed myself to walk further into the forest when I suddenly heard something. It sounded so foreign, yet so similar all at once. Distress bubbled in my chest. With great fragility, I steadily paced myself forward, afraid but wanting to know what I had just heard. I glided ever so slightly more until I saw it, right there, in front of me. I couldn't believe my eyes. What I was seeing was an image that I thought I would never see again. At least not truly see. I closed my eyes and blinked hard, opening them again only a second later. To my great surprise, he was still there, the boy. The boy who had always seemed to be heartless, emotionless, was holding his head between his knees and crying. It was Malfoy. I did not know what to do. It had been 10 years. 10 years that I had not seen him. I stopped in my tracks, trying to avoid making any sounds. It was too late. I had never been the discreet type. He had heard me. He slowly picked up his head and turned in my direction. He was no longer a boy, evidently, but it still surprised me in some odd way or another to see him so much older. I could not breathe or speak or communicate with any words. I now knew the true definition of speechless. My words had gone missing. Time had taken its toll on him. Dark, leaden bags circulated under his metallic, silvery blue eyes. His skin seemed more ashen than it ever had, and he had forever been already so pale. His flesh sunk into every crevice, every bone on his already skinny face. It was the image of sadness, of depression, of angst. It was almost too much to just look at. An invasion of privacy to see someone so struck by life's unfairness. I swallowed, unsure of how to cope with seeing him so self-destructive. He had been always well-dressed and proper in school. It was the polar opposites to behold. I slowly watched as his pink lips parted and his eyes glowed just a glimpse at my presence. There was not just a glimmer, there was also fear. There was fear of judgment, fear that maybe I would hurt him more than all the other things that already had. Even in our past was a bad one, I wanted him to know that he could come to me, that he could speak to me. I just was not sure how I was going to tell him that in my current state. I cannot be certain what it was, but something about Malfoy, Draco Malfoy, had always had a way of making me weak. I do not know if it was the name-calling that had punctured my heart too many times, or if it was his condescending smile. Maybe it was his orbs, his eyes that always had a way of reflecting his inner emotions like color-shifting chameleons. The ones even I knew I got lost in a time or two. Potter? He whispered so softly that the way his lips moved my name told me what he was saying and know the noise. I did not reply, I just looked at him, if to say I was listening to his every word, hooked like a Sebus on a fishing rod. I walked over to him, watching my every step. His eyes kept playing with darkness and light. I could not understand what they were so badly trying to say. They almost seemed to be unearthly, fake. I sat beside him, never looking too far in his direction. I was scared that maybe somehow he would take my soul. The truth was, he had already taken something else. So many years ago, I did not even bother counting. It was the organ that kept all the other ones in my body alive. The one that had the simple yet difficult task to pump liquid red life, blood, to the rest of my madly in love body. I knew that Draco had married Astoria right after coming to the Muggle world. She had gotten pregnant only a couple of weeks later and given birth to their son afterwards. His name was Scorpius. I remember Hermione telling me when we were so close that she had seen all of them at the market. His son, she said, was the spitting image of his father. I knew nothing more than that. I did not know where Astoria was or who Scorpius had become. I did not know that in another life, where good would have triumphed, that my unborn son, Albus, was supposed to be destined best friends with his. I did not know that in another world that our son's friendship would have brought us closer in the end either way. Because that is the thing about destiny. It can still change. There can be many destinies, all depending on which road you decide to take or which outcome takes place. I wonder if I would have found it weird that even if this was another so-called destiny, that Malfoy would have crossed my path, never the more. It's Scorpius. I smiled and pointed at the constellation in the onyx sky that was named after his only child. A small smile broke onto the no longer so young Malfoy's face. I even got the chance to hear his half-suppressed laughter. It was different. Maybe because he had aged and experienced some terrible things, or if it was simply because it was true. All of those years in Hogwarts, his laugh had been more of a nasty chuckle. However, this one was no heavier than the wind, that I swore it almost flew and blew away as if it was meant to be that way. The rest of the night he told me why he named his son after that constellation. He told me about his wife, which was no longer his wife. He told me things that I never thought Draco Malfoy would ever tell me. Time might have made his face grow dull, but it had strengthened his heart. It had changed him for the better, taught him that spreading love was far more important than hatred. After many hours, when my eyes became heavy and my body was falling asleep, we got up and waltzed into the forest. I smiled truthfully at the blonde boy I had once thought I hated. He glanced at me, smiling back. "Good night, Potter," he voiced brokenly as we finally parted our separate ways. The world felt better after that conversation with Draco Malfoy. I had never been good with my words, so I could not point to exactly what it was, but the air was less opaque. It was particularly easier to breathe, to move, to feel. It felt less like a prisoner in my mind, more mobile. I no longer feared going in the forest close to my house. Actually, I now found it comforting. Every night, when the sun was engulfed by the world, and everyone around me was peacefully sleeping in their closely joined and built houses, I followed Malfoy into the forest. We did not say a word as we walked past all the trees. I think it was both of our ways of feeling back home in the same way or another. I respected that. I knew he probably needed that more than I did. It was the only universe he had ever truly known, after all. When we finally reached the other side, Malfoy would repeat the same words every night. Can you feel it? The gravity pushing and pulling you to stay trapped in the forest, just so you can feel at ease, just so you can feel home. He said, gazing up at me with his innocent, dying to be fully blue eyes. Yes, I can. Can you? Can you feel it today? I would ask without fault each time. No, not today. But I used to once, he would reply. Most of the time, we would just sit there in silence. Not an awkward one like you would imagine. It was not because we did not have things to say. We had plenty. It was because in some weird way or another, words were not enough to describe our feelings. It was almost as if, in our silence, we spoke volumes that our words would only fail to express. It was in our silence that I could feel myself falling so deeply in love with him. I did not want to admit it at first, even if I already knew it deep down. It was useless to pretend otherwise. Not just because I could not control my feelings, but because I had been in denial for so damn long. One moment accepting the sentiments as they were, another denying them entirely. I had always loved him. He had never been only an enemy to me. There had always been more beneath the surface, dying to get out, dying to be said, to be told, to be felt on every level. I did not know if it was the same for him. I was too scared to ask, too anxious to even think about it. The love I had for Ginny was nothing in comparison to the love I had for him. On our nights, I would watch him looking at the sky. He had beautiful, curly blonde eyelashes that looked up even higher than him. They were barely noticeable unless you were close, and I can still remember holding my hands down so tightly, making sure he would not notice the trembling. I knew it would give me away instantly if he had. Part of me almost hoped he would catch me. Malfoy would always be wearing a white button-up vest, blue jeans, and a black coat to cover him up when he got cold. Something about the way those clothes hugged his body and the way that they grabbed onto him perfectly made my knees tremble. He was an angel in blue jeans. I remember one night I saw him. He was telling me about the Greek myths and their plethora of gods when I could not help myself for a moment longer. I begged him to look at me. Do not look at the sky, Malfoy, look at me. I quivered through the shattered tear. I could see his body tense dramatically. I could even feel his anxiety pump through his body and fill his bones, rushing through his veins. I studied his sharp jawline as he moved his visage in alignment with mine. Our eyes locked, perfectly in sync. It felt so natural, it was beyond language. His orbs were fully blue. It was beautiful. He was beautiful, all of him. Every inch of his aching, sick, cold, trembling, begging for love body was beautiful. It took every single part of me not to kiss him that night. Not to lay everything I had down on the table and give it all up for one simple kiss. I swore I knew that losing everything would be worth that feeling of his angelic lips against my less than average ones. I imagined the feeling of his soft, delicate embrace against mine. I drew small but cute freckles in my mind and made up new constellations. Constellations of his name and all the things he loved so dearly. I pictured each dot on his face as a representation of all the times he had to be strong through tough times. To me, that only proved to me just how strong this wonderful, crazy, lovable man before me was. I felt like a kid again, turning 11 on the Hogwarts Express on my way to Neverland. He was everything wrapped into one. He was all the dreams I never thought I needed, but needed more than the ones I had first dreamt. He was all that was comforting and basic you needed out of life to sustain yourself and survive. The he was also more than that. He was the adventure that rose among the horizons, the one that people feared to go on, but lusted. Malfoy? I said, worry convulsing through my body like wildfire, but only his eyes responded. They told me that I was not the only one to feel the way I had been for weeks, for years, for decades, that this was no one-sided thing, that our midnight adventures had warmed his calloused heart too.